What's good everyone, it's Zayas, and we're back for another manga review, this time of Steel Ball Run, aka JoJo's Bizarre Adventure Part 7 by Araki Hirohiko. Now, JoJo Part 7 is an absolute classic. It's my favorite part out of all the JoJo parts, which are all amazing. And I've talked about this before in my JoJo Part 1 review, and I also talked about it in when I discussed the Mal Top 100 manga on that website. This sentiment is pretty widespread on the internet. Some might say it's because of the fights, which this series features some of the best JoJo's fights that have been ever made. Others might say it's because of the story, which is chaotic and fast-paced and features about 3 different storylines, all taking place at the same time. And others might say it's the characters, who are some of the most charming, personable, and just charismatic characters ever written in manga. Araki really needs no introduction. If you want, you can check out my part 1 video where I did introduce him. My opinions are still virtually the same, even though my videos have gotten better with time, I think, at least. But I wanted to review JoJo's in order from part 1 through 8, or 9 now, and that's not happening because part 7 is getting an anime, and part 7 is one of the most exciting parts of all time, and I couldn't miss my chance to really talk about it. If you want a quick recap about what JoJo is really about from part 2 to part 6, which I didn't review yet, but I will review. Basically, JoJo is about a bunch of masculine men getting down in some crazy, bizarre adventures. It's exactly like it sounds, and it's crazier and more bizarre than you would ever expect. People are posing, people have insane powers, and in part 6, spoilers by the way, all my reviews have spoilers, the universe reset. To talk about parts 8 and 9, because they weren't out when I did my first video, part 8 got off to a very strong start. It rivaled even like part 7. But halfway through, things really started to get a little shaky and rough. And that final villain, I really wasn't feeling him. I still feel like it's better than like part 6, but maybe it's closer to like part 5 or part 2 than it is to some of my favorite parts, even though I really liked part 5 and 2. And I did enjoy part 8 as well. And now part 9 is off to a great start as well. I'm really liking Joe Dio, and I'm really enjoying his stand, which is pretty cool looking. It's the first close range stand we've really seen since part 3 and 4. And the plot with the volcanic ash just seems like it's going to be crazy, and it's leading up to something good. Now part 7 is a legendary. It ran from 2004 to 2011 in Ultra Jump, and I'll get into why this is important later. Since the universe sort of soft reset, part 7 is the alternate version of parts 1, 2, and 3. Part 8 is sort of the alternate version of part 4, and part 9 is the alternate version of part 5. And for some reason, we are now horse racing from one side of the states all the way to the other side. And they literally find the corpse of Jesus Christ in their way. In my opinion, this is by far the most unhinged JoJo's plot, but somehow in the best way possible. First, I want to talk about how chaotic and fast this whole thing is. It's fast-paced and rapid from the start. There's no lulls. It just plot, character development, plot, more important plot. It just goes by so quickly. It's really easy to get immersed in this world. Each chapter in this work is much longer than it previously was, but the total chapter count is a lot lower. And even though this is one of the lowest total chapter counts for a JoJo's part, it feels like it's one of the largest because of this. This is likely because of the switch from Shonen Jump, where they want you to have shorter chapters, to Ultra Jump, where they're more lax in letting artists do what they want. For example, by the time we're at chapter 10, we've already created this accelerating race where people are neck and neck and everybody has a chance to win, and he's already introduced and developed close to 6 or 7 characters which were integral to the later parts of the story. And he's also introduced new powers, which I will talk about afterwards. Other examples of the plot moving quickly is Johnny getting a stand upgrade every 20 chapters, maybe Johnny and Gyro finding corpse parts very quickly, or just characters' backstories, which almost every character outside of Johnny or Gyro had their backstory done in under a chapter, which is pretty fast considering how well developed the characters were in this work. I also want to praise Araki for this idea of making it a Western, which sounds so crazy for a JoJo part where people are fighting with these insanely powerful stands, but because it's a Western, it allows for a lot of freedom, a lot of chaos, a lot of change, and change is really important for the themes that happen in this work, especially when it comes to Johnny Joestar, who is in sore need of change. The adventures are some of the most creative, diverse, and yes, bizarre that we've seen in JoJo's. If you forget about the fact that they're racing on horses while having stand battles and trying to find the corpse of Jesus Christ, there's other stuff like the Aesop fable that they somehow incorporated into the story behind getting some corpse parts. Johnny Joestar is a cripple who fights some of the most powerful people who have existed in the JoJo's universe, and Gyro comes from a family line of executioners, but not just any executioners, people who kill using steel balls. Part 7 is insane, and the fact that it's a Western just gives it so much creativity and flavor and depth. Like, the horses were actually useful in a lot of battles and were important when crossing terrain, closing distance, having fights on horseback. There's also the fact that there's stuff like duels, like cowboy duels. I think in particular, True Man's World was almost a duel of some sorts, one of my favorite fights. And they have pistols on them, all these characters, because it's a Western, they have pistols. And as the cherry on top, the plot also adds in a bunch of twists to keep you guessing. We learn the president organized this race for the sole purpose of finding this corpse. We also see characters from previous parts like Abdal and Dio and Stronheim, and we think it's the same Dio, only to learn it's a completely different Dio with a different backstory, and he's gotten different powers, until we get the same Dio come back using this crazy stand power way later in the series. When Dio comes in at the end with the world, it was incredibly hype. I don't feel like Dio was the final villain here, but it was a really fun scene to see that we get the old Dio back, the ruthless, conniving, cunning, more evil Dio with the world. It was just a really hype moment. If you're a big fan of part 3, you probably love this. This is also where I would say the series sort of resembles part 3. Earlier parts do resemble part 1 and 2. The part 1 and 2 element was obviously the Zeppeli teaching Johnny spin. This was kind of like the Zeppeli in part 1, teaching him how to use Hammon. Johnny's real name being Jonathan, obviously a reference to part 1. And the fact that spin is used a lot here is sort of kind of reminiscent of part 1 and 2 when Hammon was used a lot more. Gyro does remind me of Joseph a little bit too. Obviously the two are very different characters, but the part that reminds me of him is his witty, playful demeanor that can make people feel reassured whenever he's around. And there is an in-universe version of Joseph later on in part 8, but there are a few qualities that I see in Gyro. I really think Steel Ball Run is peak storytelling. It's creative, it's diverse, it's non-stop, and it does all these things while allowing for these characters and also these action scenes to do their thing when needed. I also want to talk a little bit about religion here. There is a connection, especially with, Jesus Christ being one of the main focuses here, and the fact that their search for these corpse parts and trying to redeem themselves is sort of like a metaphorical version of them being saved by Jesus Christ. And by them, I mean Johnny, for one, and also Hot Pants, who's trying to go through this same sort of arc. But I don't think there's that much of a deeper connection to Christianity here. I know some people will find these things and you can overanalyze everything, but when it comes to the storyline, that's the main focus. And this ties into what I talked about before with the switch from Shonen Jump to Ultra Jump. It seems like to me that Araki wanted to be a little more free to talk about more mature themes like religion, like morality, and show a little more violence in his work, where there's a lot more violent scenes in part 7, if you didn't notice. There's a lot more gore and blood. These things all help the work to feel more real and more alive. Next, I want to talk about the characters, and I'll start with one of my favorite characters in all manga, maybe across all mediums of media, and that's Gyro Zeppeli. His intro is cold. You really think this guy's gonna be like a lunatic. I mean, his nonchalant demeanor, his appearance with his teeth, which are all crazy looking, but never judge a book by its cover. As it turns out, this guy is one of the most morally upstanding, kind and lovable characters. In a lot of ways, he's the co-protagonist of this work. Him and Johnny sort of share screen time, but Gyro is the character who ended up sticking with me more. To me, he's an example of a man's man, who people should really strive to be like. Initially, he came down to this race in order to win, to save a child from being wrongfully killed. He didn't want any of the money for himself, but he wanted to save this kid by any means necessary. On the way, he meets Johnny, who initially he doesn't really want anything to do with, but seeing Johnny's passion, desire, and just naturally wanting to help other people who need it, Gyro ends up being close with him, becoming his mentor, and the two becoming really great friends. And Gyro goes on a journey of self-discovery along with Johnny to see who he really is and what he stands for. And keep in mind, Gyro does this all with no stand. He defeats countless dangerous opponents, teaches Johnny everything he needs to know, helps all these different people with no stand. He technically has a stand called Ball Breaker, which is kind of funny, but for the most part, it was shown once in the final fight, and it almost defeated the most insane adversary in all of JoJo's, the corpse-buffed president. Throughout the race, we see traits from him like confidence, empathy, determination, and just playfulness. It's stated early on in this manga that Gyro isn't able to win certain legs of these races because he doesn't have the unwavering persistence of somebody like a Johnny Joestar or somebody like Dio. And that's completely true, but that's not who Gyro is. He's not somebody who would murder in cold blood to achieve his goals or do whatever it takes. That's just part of who he is as a person. And Gyro does end up losing the race, but he never really loses what's important. He doesn't lose his morals, his dignity, or his honor. And you know his death was coming because he's a Zeppeli. And if you know anything about JoJo, Zeppelis do die. But the way he went out was incredible, and he passed on a lot of important things to Johnny, which Johnny didn't realize before. As the epic final scene is happening, Gyro is fighting the president, and the president inflicts him with a wound which is going to reach his heart, and he's going to die. And the president tells him the only way he can save himself is by using the power of the corpse to redirect the wound to some innocent person. But instead of even attempting this, because Gyro doesn't want some random person to die in his place, Gyro simply accepts his death, teaches Johnny his last lesson, and then proceeds to go out in like the most badass way possible. Gyro probably could have killed Funny Valentine, but he didn't want to because he doesn't want some innocent person to die because of him. And that's the whole point of his storyline with the kid having a fair trial. So Gyro really died by his honor, which I really respect. His death scene was hard to watch because it's hard to see a man as courageous and virtuous as him pass away. Obviously, we knew it was coming. It was also sad just knowing this was the last time we'll see his character in this work. He just has so much resolve and integrity. He's super lovable, cool, caring. I feel like he's pound for pound one of the characters with one of the most auras of all time. One of my favorite characters of all time. I love this character. Johnny's the next character I'll discuss. He wasn't as great of a character as Gyro, and there's other Joestars I've liked more than him, but narratively his story was super important to the whole theme of JoJo Part 7. I do have appreciation for him just because of his sheer desire and will. He's basically this horse jockey who's trying to get a second chance at life, and he feels like he can get this through the power of spin or the power of this corpse. Now, Johnny didn't really deserve to lose his ability to walk. He didn't do anything that bad. But basically what happened was that because his dad was treating him poorly, he would engage in problematic behavior, and it all sort of caught up with him, and he became a cripple. You can see how a kid who has all this fame can let it get to his head a little bit, but obviously him losing his ability to walk was a huge blow, and he really has this burning desire of getting it back no matter what. His disability is pretty unique in the realm of manga. I know Real is a basketball wheelchair manga series. It's obviously very different from this because Johnny is sort of showing that you can still be a cripple and be strong and be a strong individual. His sheer tenacity, his burning desire, the fire, the literal fire in his eyes sometimes was what I liked most about him. Out of all the Joestars, I'd say he was the most ruthless by far. Johnny also exhibits the most growth out of any of the Joestars. He goes from this guy who really has no prospects to winning, almost winning the Steel Ball Run race. He also goes from this guy who's bitter and self-centered to a guy who has empathy and can be a little more selfless. He can sacrifice for himself for his wife, like we see in part 8. Gyro is obviously allowing for him to expand his worldview, to be a little more empathetic, to be able to see that other people are important as well. And I think that's what causes a lot of his growth, and you can really see the change that he undergoes. I also want to talk about the dynamic between Johnny and Gyro, because it really does feel special, even when compared to duos like Caesar and Joseph, who were great, or like Josuke and Okuyasu, also great. These guys kind of are even better and blow a lot of manga duos out of the water. The way the two playfully banter in the middle of this high-stakes race where either could die at any moment really makes it feel super authentic and real. And the way the two gradually warm up to one another after they're initially super hesitant because Johnny thinks Gyro is crazy and Gyro thinks Johnny is this cripple who's going to slow down his journey. It's great to see the way the two warm up to one another. Some of my favorite panels in this manga are when the two interact with one another. There's all these dumb jokes that they're cracking constantly, and there's also this one out of context scene where Gyro is asking Lucy to go steal the corpse parts from the president, and Johnny is protesting it, and it's really funny. Another funny scene is when Gyro tells Johnny to tell Hot Pants to eat shit and fall off her horse, and then he tells it to Hot Pants by himself, which was funny enough on its own, but later on we also get to see Gyro eating shit, literally, which was also a pretty funny inclusion if you link it back. Gyro also has a lot more of a rich family history, and he's much more well-versed in, like, worldly things, so he's kind of teaching Johnny about all these different things, which make for some cool bonding moments. Another one of my favorite scenes is when Johnny almost gets the corpse, but he loses it, and right after, he starts breaking down in tears, and Gyro teaches him a crucial lesson. I'd also like to say that Gyro and Johnny are pretty intelligent. They're almost comparable to part 2, like Joseph from part 2. The deductions they make often quick. They're often not unreasonable for characters to make, and they're good deductions. There's lots of other characters. There's characters like Steven Steele, Lucy Steele, Weka Pipo, Sandman, Ringo, like Mountain Tim, Poco Loco. They're all great characters. Although I have a lot to say about all these characters, I'll only talk about the main ones for the sake of time, as this video is probably already pretty long, which will be Lucy, Ringo, Hot Pants, Dio, and Funny. So Lucy Steele is married to Steven Steele, the man who organized the Steel Ball Run. Obviously, the Steel Ball Run is not only his name, it's also a play on Gyro's steel balls, which he uses for a lot of the work. She's a very young lady who was in a very bad situation, but Steven sort of rescues her by putting her into a platonic relationship with him, thereby protecting her from these other indebtors. Throughout the series, Lucy shows a lot of courage and heart. She's placed in incredibly dangerous situations with no way to really protect herself, but she continues forwards anyways. In some ways, she probably resembles the Virgin Mary as she births the corpse's head, but I'm not really digging too deep into the religious themes here. Ringo, you might say, is just a minor antagonist, and it's true he is, but their encounter with Ringo became one of my favorite in the work, and I just loved it so much I wanted to talk about him. It was done so well. The deja vu, the orchard in the middle of nowhere. This is also where Johnny realizes he's more ruthless than Gyro, but Gyro manages to come back and do what needs to be done because it absolutely has to. Ringo has a very interesting philosophy. He's very stoic, and he believes he needs to win fair duels in order to become a better person, and only by winning enough duels he will become complete as a human being. His whole backstory is that he was about to be assaulted by a man sexually, but he was saved because of this fair duel that he engaged in. If you look at it literally, his philosophy is a little ridiculous, but if you look at it metaphorically, that life is a series of duels that you need to overcome in order to improve yourself, it does make a lot of sense. His whole ability led to this epic cowboy standoff happening multiple times, which was really cool to see, a really fun fight idea. This was also where Gyro overcame his weakness, and neither of the two could really back down at any point, and Gyro had to do what had to be done. Even the naming scheme here I loved, like Mandom and True Man's World, and this all leads to this killer final scene where Ringo tells Gyro that he must embrace the true man's values and welcomes him to the true man's world. Hot Pants had a good backstory about overcoming her survivor's guilt. I like the scene where Johnny is just suddenly super infatuated with Hot Pants. The two do share a lot of similarities. Obviously, Johnny went on to marry someone else. Hot Pants is now no longer in this world. The throwback to the Erina kiss with Hot Pants and Dio is a pretty fun scene as well. Again, this is another similarity that the two universes have. Both Erina and Dio, I guess Erina might not be Hot Pants in this world, but they both share a kiss. So Dio initially doesn't seem like he's gonna be the main antagonist in this work, but his persistence and dedication constantly make him a thorn in the main duo's side, winning legs of this race constantly. It's actually very admirable because he's always willing to do the dirty work, and I liked his backstory quite a bit, with him trying to get back at the ones who wronged his mother. At first, he's not even really a villain. He's only really fighting when he's attacked by others, or when he's made to through this dinosaur stand, which was a really fun scene as well, where Gyro, then the whole town turns into dinosaurs. He is obviously a little bitter about his circumstances, but it seems like he's mostly just there to race for the most part, until one of the last few scenes where he turns against the duo because he teams up with Funny. And him and Hot Pants in the end chase down this train in the final scene, and that leads in like a domino effect to one of the most tense, hype, exciting action scenes, like all the way from when they board the train or chase the train to when Funny is defeated. The tension is just in the air, and it's just super intense. It helps hype up the president too by showing them how powerful he really is. His return is even better, besting Johnny when he comes back with the world, but he loses to Lucy Steele somehow. But it was a really fun return while it lasted. The villains in general were very on point. Characters like Sandman and Ringo had like great stories going on, and they were developed for periods of time, and in the end, the final villain we had Funny. Now, in terms of main JoJo's villains, Funny Valentine is a little bit of an anomaly. A lot of people say that he's a true neutral villain. He's doing what's good for the country. He's not really doing evil. And although I think he's probably the least villainous JoJo villain, he does end up doing some pretty heinous stuff. Funny's main motivation is making the US into the strongest nation it can really be. And that seems like an honorable goal. But the problem here is that Funny's words aren't entirely true all the time. And I do believe he does want to make the US as the best it can be. But also, he does some stuff which is completely unrelated to this, but still very villainous. For example, he says he wants to make the States into the greatest nation it can be, but he mindlessly murders the citizens of this nation for no real purpose when he can choose to sort of avoid it. There's also the scene with the train driver, you guys know what I'm talking about, and there's the scene where he tries to force himself on Lucy, which I can't really say how that's helping the United States become a better country. Yeah, I think it is somewhat believable that he thinks that a lot of the actions he takes are for the good of the States, and that does make him probably the most morally gray villain that JoJo's has seen. It is a little interesting to discuss exactly if he was evil or not. His actions obviously betray his words though. Narratively, I do think he does great work as a villain because his abilities are beyond busted, and he sort of is super vicious, which leads him to beating out Johnny and Gyro, especially Gyro. He ends up losing to his viciousness, but Johnny manages to beat him at his own game with his determination. Funny is certainly pretty complex. I think he was a great villain for this type of work, where Araki wanted to be a little more mature. Next, I wanted to kind of talk about the powers here, which also sort of ties into the art. JoJo's is known for crazy off-the-wall stand battles and has been known for this since part 3, but with the resetting of the universe in part 6, Araki uses this opportunity to introduce spin, and spin is super cool. Again, Gyro faces off against some of the most dangerous adversaries with this ability, and it's super versatile. There's stuff like the golden spin, horseback spin, probably like other forms of spin too. Oh yeah, Johnny has infinite spin, and I also like to say the horse spin was a cool little thing that merged Western elements with the JoJo elements, so I thought that was pretty cool. It comes back in part 8, and I think we'll see it in part 9 again. And I just think it's so versatile. There's like medical uses. Gyro's family has been using it for all these different things. It has a long history. And there's the left side paralysis. There's so many different applications. And then there's the stands themselves, which are some of the most imaginative, wildest, and strongest stands we've seen in JoJo. Most stand abilities in this part do work while being unseen, so we're not getting people coming out and punching people like we did back in part 3. For example, Mandem can rewind time 6 seconds exactly. It's incredibly broken ability, but because of Ringo's beliefs about fair duels, telling his opponents how his ability works, and reaching over to manually rewind time, it makes it beatable, but barely. There's Heiya, the shout out to the goats outcast. There's lots of pop and music references in here, like pop culture and music, such as Ringo as well. JoJo's has it in every part. I won't go over every single one. But Poco Loco was just a fun character, a guy who was super lucky, won the late race off of sheer luck alone, and he wasn't really a villain, he was just there. Tusk was a super cool stand. I loved how it looked visually. It was very imposing while also being a little mysterious, and I love that it incorporated spin into its powers. Evolutions too, everybody loves evolutions. It's in all the big shonens. Evolutions were pretty cool. Ball Breaker looked cool despite the name. If you want some of my favorite stands in this part, I'm just gonna name them off a list. So we got Scary Monsters, Hot Pants' stand, Sandman's stand, the Bomber Terrorist stand, Blackmore's stand, I think that was one of my favorites for sure, 20th Century Boy, Mountain Tim stands, and all of these led to cool, cinematic, dynamic fights. And then there's the best stand in this entire work, which is Dirty Deeds Done Cheap, aka D4C, and it has one of the coolest designs I've ever seen, definitely the best design in this work. And on top of that, the ability is super dangerous and cool. It allows him to go into other dimensions, pull people out, and if these two people from alternate dimensions meet, they will die. It's incredibly dangerous, and it makes it even more dangerous when he acquires Love Train, an upgraded version of his stand. All the stand battles were high stakes, full of action, thrilling, super entertaining, and I just love them. When it comes to the art style, JoJo kind of evolved here to be more sleek and modern. Even though 5 and 6 were already trending in this direction, it's even more so in part 7. Characters look like they're modeling. They have all these bizarre, crazy outfits, and it's hard not to love how cool they look, how confident they look in these absurd outfits. All in all, part 7 does a great job artistically with its panels, with its designs. It really completed that sleek modern look here. Part 6, part 5, they weren't all the way there, but now I feel like it's completed. And before, my favorite part artistically was probably part 3. It was super weighty, rigid, dense. But here I love part 7 for a lot of different reasons. Part 7 is flowing, expressive, elegant. It's almost like you're seeing a mixture of a Western with some sort of fashion magazine. Character designs I loved. Gyro especially, you look at him, you think he's some sort of freak, like I said earlier. But other characters all had great designs. I could list them all off, but it's literally every single character. There's not a character I would leave out when I say they had a great design. Maybe the trio family, that's the only one. Paneling here is super smooth too. It's very fluid. Panels are overlapping. The transitions are smooth. It leads to very intense moments, like for example, the final showdown between Funny and Johnny. You kind of see the expression of shock on Johnny's face, only for it to lead into this crazy final battle. You have to experience it yourself. It's that good. And if you just want to know my favorite scenes, the showdown with Bunny and Johnny and Gyro was probably my favorite. After which was probably like what happened after that, all the Dio events, all the corpse events. And then my third favorite was the showdown with Ringo. I loved all of these scenes. Actually, I loved the entire manga, really. The ending was bittersweet, but it was super satisfying. Like, Johnny learned so much from Gyro. He finished the race. He sent his dear friend back off with his horse, his dear horse, back to his own country, and it wrapped up things super nicely. It's a bittersweet ending. Obviously, Johnny gets what he wants in terms of being able to walk, but he loses his best friend because of this. And Gyro accomplishes his goal of setting the dude free, not because he won the race, because there was a takeover, and the kid dies of a cold anyways. It really makes you reflect and think a little bit. Also, as a side note, because it's already long, there was some solid comedy in here as well. I still think parts 3 or 4 have the best comedy in them overall, but at its best, it definitely rivals these works in terms of how amusing it is. For example, when characters like Abdul or Stronheim get introduced, and you think these guys are going to be mainstays, they're going to be real contenders in this race, and then each of them gets eliminated within a few pages each, nonetheless. They also accused Stronheim for doping in the 1980s. And if you know anything about steroids, they did not exist in the 1980s. Also, Johnny Gyro had so many funny moments together. Like I said before, there was the moment with spaghetti that I want to talk about, where she's making spaghetti, or the moment where they're talking about like random things and they just burst out into song, like the song about pizza and mozzarella. It's just so unexpected and random that it ends up being pretty funny. I love the friendships, the growth, the tenacity, the sacrifices of these characters. It's one of those series that really just reminds me why I love manga so much. I'll revisit this whenever I get the chance. I think it's a perfect, amazing work. I think everybody should go read this if they haven't, and read parts 1 through 7 before this, which is a lot to ask, but I think you really should if you're a fan of manga. 10 out of 10 work, probably one of the best works of all time, maybe top 10. Honestly, even if you're not a fan of manga, read this. This shit is good. Thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a comment, anything to do with manga. Is this a classic? Is this a 10 out of 10? Does it deserve it? Let me know. So to make this quick, I've been sick. A lot of other things have happened, and I'm kind of better now. So I'll be putting out more videos. I want to kind of do a short video and a longer video every other week. So maybe next video I'll do a short video and then I'll do a more in-depth video. I think that'll be easier to manage, but we'll see how things go. Maybe I'll start up on social media soon. Again, I'll see how things go. I think I'll need to if I want to hit 1,000. But yeah, thank you guys so much for watching. Leave a comment. Let me know what you guys think. See you